What's going on, everybody? This is the blockchain backer bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Welcome to a new week. We have a lot going on out there in the markets. We'll start today off by looking over here at the Bitcoin price chart and talking about the altcoin market and the cryptocurrency market. We're trying to tie a lot of things in. If you don't know, futures for markets opened last night. We've had a lot of wild continuation of what we've seen over the course of the last 2 weeks. We'll take a peek around the whole market, try to paint the picture of what's happening everywhere, and do our best to try to understand it. I talked about this last Friday that this moment reminds me of just kind of a climatic event like we had back C19 back in March of 2020. So here we are in March of 2022. It feels super climatic. There's a lot of overextended price action that's happening in a lot of commodities and whether or not these things are peaking or breaking out. But we're going to look around a lot of the market. So right now, obviously, there's a lot of worry out there in the world with geopolitical events. There's a lot of worry out there with price action and what's happening. And sometimes I just step back and I try to simplify things and say, okay, looking at Bitcoin, what is happening at this point right now? You have a higher high, higher low, higher high, higher low. Nothing crazy has happened on the Bitcoin price chart, for example. And we've pointed to this before that, hey, it's residing within a parallel channel at this point and more of just kind of hang out at the lower boundary of the parallel channel. One of the things we've been studying for the last several months is how Bitcoin has been following a bear market fractal for nearly 6 months. If it had still been following it today, we could have said that it's been following it for 6 months. So obviously it broke from it just a few days ago. That's how close we were to 6 months of this thing following it nearly identically. But now it appears that we have broken away from this thing. If you know, I was getting a little unsettled in there because at the top of each Bitcoin bull run, we've seen an altcoin season happen. In 2018, as we went into our retracement, that's where the altcoins took off and went on a huge run. The altcoin seasons have typically lasted 25 to 40 days. Time was running out. If this thing was going to continue any longer, the time was ticking and we weren't getting that signal over there from the altcoin market that we were ready for that to happen. Well, here we go. Now we see why. We've spent a lot of time studying the inverse price chart of Bitcoin. It was the thing that helped us get it through May, June, and July of last year, that the price of Bitcoin would hold when it pulled back down to $30,000, indicating that it would continue and set a new all-time high. And as we're here on this inverse price chart, as this goes down, the price of Bitcoin is going up. But we were comparing that to several different structures and how on reversals, including Bitcoin's bottom back in 2018, the gold to silver ratio, XRP, these structures are all very common. And what has happened here with the Bitcoin price chart is still starting to look a lot like what we see when we have these more long and grueling retracements that end up coming into play. So it seems like we have now broken away from this whole time frame of being like, hey, we've followed this fractal for 6 months. We've got, 20 days left for these altcoins to do anything, and that it's looking more like typical structures of things of how they play out for a very long time. Revert that back to the standard scale in there and you get a better idea of what we've talked about a lot. Whoops. In which we see an A, B, C correction come in here. For me, that provides some relief because time was getting super close in here, but still nothing with Bitcoin has broken apart in here. It's still following these same things, and I'm glad we've been following this structure for such a long time to see different ways that these things can play out in here. And we're definitely in a pretty sloppy range right in here and mix along with it a lot of fear, right? And if we take this off the inverse price scale and we look at it in the opposite direction, if we inverse the gold to silver ratio and put Bitcoin back in the direction we're all used to looking at it at, we could see how these things can just play out like this right in here, right? And these pullbacks down in here happen. It's just a slop accumulation range down here at the bottom. But it's normal that we see a bunch of fear here. And, unfortunately, this is exactly what we saw happen back in here. Of course, now we're looking at geopolitical fears coming up in here. But back in here, we had a lot of very crypto-oriented fear that took place at the same time after very similar pull downs that happened here in crypto. As you know, we were having the grayscale stuff, the China stuff, the Elon stuff, the whole thing. At the top, we have laser eyes and diamond hands, and we're going to 100K. At the bottom, we're going to gloom and doom and the world is over, right? But in the end, nothing crazy has broken apart in here. It's just looking like we've stepped away from our fractal, and it looks like ABC is more likely. But there's no question that there's other things going on in the market that crypto hasn't seen. And of course, this is where you're going to get all the people who scream this time is different. They're the same people who scream this time is different at the top, at the bottom, at the top, at the bottom, this time is different. There's definitely a different element that's happening out here in the world in regards to commodity prices that are taking off. And one of the big ones, of course, is oil, right? That's the fuel for everything. And the big question is oil actually in some type of really big breakout that's going to happen in here? Or is this totally just a complete fake out due to a geopolitical event that is occurring? And we can go back and look at the history of the oil chart. And whenever we've had excessives happen like this, and we know this just from crypto, right? When you have excessive moves to the upside, are they sustainable, right? Are they going to keep going up forever? Or are they going to turn over on itself? And we can look back to, the last big times there were big rises that happened in oil. These things were not sustainable in here, right? They ended up turning over on themselves very, very quickly. And right now, we don't know if that's the future of oil in here, if this is all temporary. But what has happened, obviously, in the last 2 weeks, I would say, is that equities and stocks have all paused out, and we've seen commodities really shooting up, right? You've seen gold, silver, oil, wheat, corn. All the commodities have gone up, but equities have paused. And once again, as usual, cryptocurrencies do the same thing as the equity market does. There's always the big argument of store of value, the big argument of crypto's tied, crypto's a commodity. Theoretically, I think of cryptocurrency as a commodity. But when it comes to the correlation between cryptocurrencies and markets, we don't tend to see the big correlation between commodities and crypto. We see the correlation between the equity market and crypto. And so are we going to continue seeing oil moving and the commodity markets moving at the rate that we've seen them going at, or is this all temporary? I could take my best guess at it, but it would really just be my best guess. I am not an oil expert by any means, but I can look to the past to see whenever there's been excesses that have happened in oil, anytime there's been any excesses that have happened in oil, they don't tend to sustain themselves or get this far and be able to hold it for very long. It ends up turning over on itself. Even if we took all that off there and we look back to, the whole bull run that happened in here and how high and excessive this thing ended up going, right? I mean, the move we're seeing right now is almost as climatic as the move that happened back in May and June of 2008. You can see how high it is. It's been excessive. And not only that, it's moving at a velocity even faster than what happened back in there. So is that sustainable in the commodity market, or is this more of kind of like the high climatic moment that's happening here in the commodity market? Looking over at gold, it's gotten through its 702 Fibonacci retracement. It's pierced through its 786 Fibonacci retracement over the course of the last nearly 2 years, over a year and a half in here. It's retraced. It's gotten back up into the retracement levels. Is this the climatic moment? Is gold going to break out, or are we at a very heavy resistance level in here? And looking over at silver, we see a retracement really coming in here, right? It's kind of the breakdown level. And if you don't know this about me, a lot of people do know this about me, but many people probably don't, is that I've been a very big gold and silver stacker for a long time. I've put videos out on this YouTube channel on how I buy gold, how I buy silver, how I try to avoid a lot of the premiums. Those videos don't really do that well when I put them out here on this channel, but I'm passionate about it and I've shared it. But I've taught, the tricks of the trade on how I try to buy metals without having to pay a lot of premiums. So I've always been a huge believer in gold and a huge believer in silver. And on November 9th, when Michael Saylor was telling everybody, if you believe in sound money, you need to sell your gold and buy Bitcoin on November 9th, I made sure I put it out there on November 9th after that to say I would never in my wildest dreams sell my gold to buy Bitcoin. Zero chance. And well, for Bitcoin, November 9th was literally right there, right? Put a little cursor right here on the screen. You could see that. November 9th, sell your gold and buy Bitcoin. Yeah, zero chance. And we can see that since November 9th, Bitcoin has lost 47% versus gold. So I'm a huge believer in gold and I'm a huge believer in silver. And even back in February of 2021, I thought gold was highly appealing at the prices that it was at. When gold was reaching down in there to $1,729 down in here, which $1,729 was right there, right? So I'm a huge believer in gold, huge stacker in gold, huge stacker in silver. But one of the things I get asked in my live streams quite often, if you don't make it out to the live streams, is that I've been very hesitant on stacking silver up at these prices that we've been at up in here. So most of my silver accumulation all took place during these time periods down in here. And then as we got up in here, yeah, I keep stacking because it's part of my monthly routine that I stack, but the vast majority of it's down here. And I've just been unwilling to get, really heavy on silver. And, because, my channel doesn't do that well whenever I'm talking about precious metals and all that kind of stuff, it's just not very, of interest to a lot of my channel. But I study that gold to silver ratio a lot. I study gold, I study silver. I make my best guesses on what I think is the better buy, right? And one of the things I've always thought to myself is, when I study the gold to silver ratio and I kind of like try to guess how I think it's going to play out, my thought process has always been silver looks like it wants to go back to like the $26 price level, and then silver is going to plummet on itself back down into the teens. So each time in my live streams, people ask me that about silver, do you still think it's going to go down into the teens? $18 has been kind of my target. I think it could go even lower than 18. But, for my personal, charting that I do on my own outside of, doing charting here on the YouTube channel, when I've done it for silver, it's always been this $26 area and then turn over on itself and head down much lower, essentially heading back down and closing out all these gaps that we have back down in here, getting back down into the potentially the 17s, even down here into the 16s. And a lot of it just stems from the structure that's playing out over here on silver. And we talk about these things all the time, right? 1, 2, 3, coming down below this level over here. Then we're having 4. And then off comes the bigger plunge. And you can see down here on the bottom of the screen, I've got the XRP price chart when it did something very similar to that, right? And that this kind of pop-up that we're seeing happening over here in silver reminds me a lot of what it was like for XRP before the bigger plunge ended up taking place, right? But why does all of this matter, right? Why am I sitting here saying, I don't think this is really that sustainable in the commodity market, right? And I'm just making my best guess because it's a chaotic moment right now. There's no question it's a chaotic moment. But, we have wheat flying, corn flying, gold flying, silver flying, oil flying. All of these things are happening all at the same time, very excessively, like we've seen in excesses before. And the craziest thing about it all is that the dollar is rising at the exact same time all these things are happening. And that is all just so odd. Now, the dollar's gotten through the 702 retracement. There's still one more retracement level up a little bit higher. But the big challenge comes in here is if, while we look at all these things, we say, when we get comfortable, we always assume things are just going to continue for forever. But, the obvious trick of everything is trying to figure out where a reversal is going to come in, because the reversal happens and the wrong footing happens. But we see the dollar getting into retracement levels. We see excesses happening over there in oil. And when those excesses have happened, reversals have happened really fast. Silver's it has a very similar structure of what ends up happening before another move down ends up occurring. And it feels like, we're in the midst of an actual kind of, C19 style moment. And it's happening at the same time of the year as all of that happened. And it's excessive moves. And when things happen excessively and they happen really fast, they're typically not sustainable. And at the same time, that it's been odd that there's a correlation happening here of the dollar rising and commodity prices rising at the exact same time. Now, the dollar rising, this is measured the dollar versus a basket of currencies throughout the rest of the world. So the dollar is essentially getting stronger versus other currencies. Inflation is still running rampant, even versus the dollar. It's just running more rampant versus other currencies rather than versus the dollar. It doesn't mean that the purchasing power of the dollar is going up. It just means that other currencies are significantly weaker than the dollar right now, so long as this move upward is continuing. But as we know, we're into the retracement level. And we know we've seen these types of falls and retracements happen before. We've studied that over there on Bitcoin. And, whether or not this whole movement in here before the final breakout and final excess is happening like we've seen before the reversal ends up pulling down, that's my best guess. And that would have confluence with there still being an additional push up in the stock market. And now let's take a step back here for a minute, because let's just talk about the geopolitical situation going on out there in the world and the narrative going on in the world. Right now, if you were going to say, hey, the stock market's going to break out and go much higher, most people are going to tell you, no, it's not going to happen because, all this stuff has to wrap up and, this is going to get much worse and everything like that. And the reality is, I saw something over there on Twitter, and I wish I tried spending like 20 minutes searching for it for whoever said it. And somebody had posted on Twitter, Here is how you perfectly trade these types of geopolitical events and the news flow that happens. ... Don't. And that's the reality of it. There's no way anybody has the capacity to be able to trade the news flow on something that happens in this type of event that is occurring in here. You've got so many people who are convinced it's going to go one way or it's going to go another way or it's going to happen much longer or whatnot. But we have no idea if this thing could wrap up tomorrow, right? And then what would happen within the markets if it did wrap up tomorrow? Now, there may be people saying there's zero chance that it's going to wrap up tomorrow. And then I challenge those people to say, okay, how have you formulated your opinion on that? First of all, do you trust the news? Chances are you probably don't trust the news. Secondly, have you formulated your opinion based off of social media and news narratives of what's actually happening? And if you have, then you are trusting sources that you already don't trust. And you have no way to decipher what's real, what's 4D chess, when are things going to wrap up, how are things going to play out. We have literally no way. And the only thing that is within my power or within my control, since I have zero ability to be able to know how governments are going to play their hand, or if this is multiple years of buildup to play out like this, and if there's a plan on how it's going to wrap up in half a second, or if it's going to continue, is to just merely look at the charts and say, the last time the Dow Jones had a big run up like this, it had one more final excess left in it, and that the dollar is up here into retracement levels. And that when we've seen these types of retracements happen, consolidation, which with a final excessive push up into the retracements. And at the same time, we're seeing big swings happening over here into the commodity market while people are afraid of the equity market. And that when these types of big, massive rises have happened in here, they were unsustainable. And if the money is going to flow back to the equity market, well, then it's likely going to flow back to the correlated asset class. And again, like we talked about, everybody gets comfortable and getting caught up in the narrative and saying things are going to keep going one way and they're going to go in that same direction for forever. If you believe that, then you have to say to yourself, well, oil, it hit $125, $130, and the velocity at which it moved, just 2 weeks ago, it was set in the 70s, right? So if you think that's going to continue forever, well, then you're thinking in 6 months from right now that oil is going to be like $500, $600, $700 per barrel. That's highly unlikely. It's going to reverse at some point. So where is that reversal going to happen at? And then what's going to happen at that reversal? For me, I say to myself, well, these things have been correlated to the dollar. The dollar's back at retracement levels. Now seems like a good of time as any. But if we also step back and look at it and say, holy cow, that is so many different moving elements, that's having to really almost figure out what's the next narrative going to be? Is this whole geopolitical event going to wrap up? Everybody's going to shake hands, kiss, and hug each other? Probably not. But how will it play out? It's really hard to figure all of that out. So the only thing that is within my capacity is to move back to the chart to try to tie it all back into crypto and say, keep it simple, stupid. What's happening over here on the Bitcoin price chart, right? Bitcoin is likely in a bear market, but it's likely not crashing just yet. It's still just residing within a channel within itself right in here. Nothing has broken down over here on Bitcoin. It's still just hovering in here. And as we've gotten down to the lows, extreme negative news flow, right? It's as if Bitcoin was ready for the negative news to come in. And by the time it got here, you mix in a lot of optimism. And you got to remember, when Bitcoin was falling, all the Bitcoin maxis are still stacking, still saying Bitcoin's good, it's all great, it's all great. But once it got down here, once this happened, they flipped to it's a bear market. And then when they flipped to it's a bear market, the big massive negative news flow ended up coming in here. But nothing has broken in Bitcoin. It's just been down here for a long time. It's been down here for 2 months at this point with a whole lot of volatility, still within a parallel channel, and likely gonna give a long, grueling retracement for Bitcoin. And, these things, they keep the fear going for a very long time in here. But the optimistic thing for it is the altcoin market. And I know that's so hard to see in here right now. And I try really hard not to let the news narratives impact me. And I know that most people do let the news narratives impact them. But we know that when these retracements can come in, sometimes they can take a long time to come in. And they can be long and grueling with ABCs. Like we've studied how these typically play out, which, as you guys know, has been the inverse style, right? So that's what we looked at it from the other angle. But this is what we're normally looking at, right? And where are we still at? We're still just up in here. It's still just grueling up in here. Structurally, it hasn't changed. And if we block out all of the noise and all of the chaos on what's going on out there in the world, it all just points back to this. And until the chart says something otherwise, it's just what I'm going to stick with. And for a lot of people, it may be disappointing to see something like this of a longer kind of grueling retracement come out of there. But for me, I partially do celebrate it because there just wasn't enough time left in this thing anymore for an altcoin season to happen. And we've seen alt seasons happen at the peak of every Bitcoin bull run. And in 2018, it was into the retracement, the 702 Fibonacci retracement that came in here, where euphoria happened in the altcoin market and a big rotation of money came out of Bitcoin and went over there. But time was just running out in here. And in these final days, saying it's seeming like the altcoin market is telling us a different story than this fractal is. And sure enough, it was. And so if it's true, if it is going to be a long and grueling Bitcoin retracement, then things aren't going to get very easy anytime soon. Bitcoin could still dip down lower in here. It wouldn't change anything. As long as these lows aren't taken out over here at 29,000, it's still just a normal retracement structure. And these pullbacks can play out for a while. And predicting time, it's going to be impossible. I'm not going to be able to do it. But I can show you how they've played out before. In both XRP and in Bitcoin, they're very long. And hopefully it doesn't take that long. Taking over a year to do it. Or maybe not, maybe less. But the good news is I'm pretty much the worst time predictor in the world. Or at least there's no one better than me, but there's also, I guess there's people who are worse than me. Probably the Riddlers. I always like to give them a hard time. But either way, structurally, every time it happens like this, every time we see these types of structures play out, it's usually that retrace takes a long time to play out in here. And that's where my mind is at right now. And I know it's hard to see all this stuff with all the geopolitical stuff and the hard moves up that are happening in commodities at this exact time period. But given enough time, narratives change, mindsets change, and euphoria tends to return. And by the time something like that happens with Bitcoin, everybody will be piling into it all over again. And when I think about narrative changes right now, I think to myself, all this stuff that's happening throughout the world is building like the most craziest positive use case here for crypto that we've seen in a long time. It becomes one thing when you have to try to convince somebody that it's good for you. It's another thing where it's the best option. My wife was telling me a story this morning. Every day we go to the gym in the morning and then we sit down on the couch and we chat for like 20 to 30 minutes before I end up coming in here and start, researching before I put out a video. And when we were talking this morning, she was telling me how people are getting creative over there in the Ukraine to help donate and help with the humanitarian crisis that's going on over there by people, even though they know they're not going to be able to go over there and visit there, they're buying Airbnbs so that way they can support those people. So, they'll go buy an Airbnb and, rent it out for 8 days, even though they know they're never going to show up to it, just to give that money right into the actual hands of the people there in the Ukraine. And I'm like talking to her, I'm like, gosh, man, I mean, do you just see it? How this is like another one of those situations, like you had the truckers up there in Canada, right? It's another one of those situations where crypto's use case is so huge. Again, you remove the intermediaries and, like with Airbnb, I mean, you're going to pay Airbnb fees. Airbnb is going to keep their cut and, it's dependent on, the bank account of the person, the money's going to get deposited in there. But for that person who's on the run to just have their phone on their hand and to get money just deposited right into their phone, into their, crypto wallet on their phone, no intermediaries in between. Just another example of you don't have to convince people. It's just the best option. And, sometimes I'm trying to be forward looking and, it's hard when we get caught in the narrative of right here and right now. But, there's chances that, when things rise back up, it's not out of FOMO. It's not out of YOLO, diamond hands, laser eyes. It's out of necessity. And so while there's a huge distraction out there and a huge event and a huge narrative going on out in there, nothing to me is screaming that Bitcoin is broken, still following the structure we've followed for nearly a year at this point, the inverse chart, typical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, rolling back up, heading in for a retracement. I think it's optimistic for the altcoin market because the altcoin market was running out of time. This makes a whole lot more sense. This is more of like what happened in 2018 with an ABC correction. And so while we want things to move really quick, it seems like they're probably going to go a little bit slower. Otherwise, we're just dealing with a whole lot of chaos as we're down here at the bottom end of the range. And as we talked about at the beginning of the video, it's not unusual to see that happening right in here. And so we'll keep an eye on things throughout the market since it is such a wild time happening right now. But otherwise, these types of things have reversed when they've gone at this type of velocity before, especially over here on oil. So it feels like a very, very C19 style moment happening in here right now. And I know it's really hard to sit there and be optimistic in these types of time periods. But I can tell you, as someone who has had this YouTube channel since 2019 and had this YouTube channel during March of 2020, and that people did not feel optimistic when the S was hitting the fan at that time back then. There was a lot of belief that crypto was going to crash and continue going much lower. And having to remain optimistic during that time period, even though the writing on the wall was very bad, right? Lockdowns were just starting at that time. We didn't know how bad it was going to get. We didn't know what the rate of infection or any of that type of stuff was going to be at that time back in March of 2020. The outlook forward was very, very unknown. And the people who took advantage of that opportunity at that time ended up being the big winners of the market, right? And so while the world around us is pretty crazy right now, from the structure of the chart, the only thing that we can really make sense of, because how are you going to read news flows? How are you going to anticipate the next thing when you don't even trust the sources that you're getting your information from? The only thing that's out there is to look at these charts. And when I look at them, I say, have we seen this before? And yes, we have. Yes, it can get sloppy in here. Yeah, that's what we're dealing with right now. And so far to this point, nothing has broken apart in here. So another crazy start to another week again. It doesn't sound like it's going to get any calmer anytime soon. So we'll keep an eye on what happens throughout the week. There won't actually be a video tomorrow. I will be over there on the BitBoy Crypto YouTube live stream tomorrow morning. So I'll share that over here on Twitter and on YouTube tomorrow. So you'll need to catch me over there tomorrow morning. Otherwise, I hope that you guys had a wonderful weekend. If you're looking for additional content from me, you can check out my website over here. This is bcbacker.com. This is a course that I put together where I deep dive into the previous Bitcoin bull runs, the previous altcoin market cycles, tying them all together to show how the cryptocurrency market has worked in the past. I teach you how to set up your own charts and your own indicators within TradingView and CoinTrader Pro so you can do your own charting. And then my most recent market update is in there on February 28th. And you could check out all of this educational content over here on bcbacker.com. You could follow me over here on Twitter at bcbacker. And I want to thank you so much for watching my channel. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you could be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.